We're officially live on Facebook for the B2B Community Builder Show, episode 201. I'm your Chief Executive Connector, Pablo Gonzalez, and today I'm excited to talk to this gentleman about a subject that I need a lot of help on because I have been described as a world-class opener and a mediocre closer. I'm trying to change that narrative. So when I met his hype man, Stephen Wallace, I immediately realized that what you guys were working on was something different, right? Like the way that Stephen reached out to me and how he had all these different breadcrumbs of automated ways to get into his universe that weren't salesy in any way really piqued my curiosity. Then we spent 3 days with your team and your people going over these processes. I've grown to understand that you've developed this app that is kind of like the thing that everybody needs when they're trying to business development, made for selling without being cheesy. And then we've gotten to talk a bunch about the way that you approach stuff. Really echoes with me. Founder of the Maverick App, Brent Hale. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
It's good to have you, my friend. I'm pumped for this conversation, and I'm pumped to have the community in the house. We do a little thing called the roll call. We got Lee Bishop in the house. He's the troublemaker of the community, as it's known. We got Jakob Oscardis, my co-bro, my content creation brother. We got from Germany, by the way. He's out there in Hamburg writing about content AI as an expert. We got Stacy Dobis in the house from Michigan. Welcome back, Stacy. We got Christine Passo. Christine, welcome back to the show. She's a new friend of mine that is working on some real interesting stuff of tying kind of like corporate culture to marketing, stuff I really believe in. We got Lori Goldman, the super connector of our community. Lori, so good to have you back. We got Chela Diaz from Orange County. We were just talking about Orange County a second ago. Lori's out there in Denver. We got Pratiti Patak, my good friend Pratiti, who says, make it a happen Monday. I like that, Pratiti. She is a mindset coach and a real estate professional as well. Good to have you here. I think everybody's checked in. I don't think I've missed anybody so far. Laura DeFranco in the house, the Laura DeFranco, the way that Donnie introduces her, book coach. Brent, I like to start with the topic of the show, man. Selling without being salesy. Why is that important? Like, don't you want to just be this like closer shark guy? Like, why do I need to sell without being salesy?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, everyone wants to be a closer shark guy, but I don't necessarily think it's that you don't want to be selling without being salesy. I just think that it's not the path, right? So selling is pretty hard, but really all selling or being in sales is just having conversations with people and just enjoying your communication with them and talking about what their problems are and then sharing what your problems have been and how you've solved those and whatnot. So as much as it's more like don't do it, it's that I think the path forward is a lot better when you can just communicate with somebody in a conversation way, as opposed to sitting there trying to sell them into something. Because to me, I hear the word selling and I think about what selling actually means, and it means that you're convincing somebody, right? And so oftentimes trying to convince somebody into something is a lot different and also a lot harder than just understanding what their needs are or understanding what their pain points are and then talking to those. And that should just come from an organic conversation versus like me selling to you.
Yeah, man. Listen, as a person who really cares about being liked by everybody that I meet, right? Like that's kind of my big fear is that. My big fear is to come across as if I'm just trying to convince somebody and not provide them value. And I've kind of struggled transitioning to the sales conversation from the value aggregate conversation, which we're going to get to right now. But you're a guy that comes from being a hunter salesperson, right? Like, can you kind of tell me how, when it became obvious to you that the approach was not show up and try to convince you, instead show up and add value? How did you come to realize that, finding those pain points first and doing those things is the way to do it, as opposed to just going in there for the kill every time?
Yeah, really good question. So I think the best way for me to answer that is that I don't know that I found it out as much as that's just naturally who I am. And I've always found success with it. So most of the time when I talk, well, not most of the time, all the time when I talk, it's really based on my own experiences and what I've been able to see through life and through my career and through what I've done. So when I talk about that, it's really based on like, what have I seen? What have I done? What's been helpful for me? And naturally, I'm just a communicator. I just talk to people. I enjoy talking to people. I'm outgoing, right? And most of the time I want to learn about them and I want to understand what's happening. At the same time, I'm always going to be like, oh, awesome, cool pain point. I actually know a solution to that, right? And so whether that's my solution or somebody else's solution, you're always doing it. You're always kind of having that conversation with people, even if you end up talking about a friend of yours or about, making a referral, right? You're technically selling in that conversation, right? You're like, oh, cool, I heard your pain point. I'm now going to provide a solution to you in some capacity. So for me, it was always more just a natural conversation that I found made me successful, right? And then as I developed teams and I built teams, you find that people were not as apt to interact with you if you were salesy, if you were pushy, if you were pushing into them, right? And so I noticed that with my teams, and it was like, well, let's approach this in a little bit of a different way, right? Because people don't want to be pushed, people don't want to be sold to, but people love having conversations. So I think it was not so much that I found it as much as I just naturally, that's what happened to me. And then I noticed kind of this, or I had this, I guess, realization, if you will, but that people didn't like that and what I was doing was working. And so as I passed that down to my team, as I developed and built those teams, I saw that it actually worked pretty well. So it's kind of what I stuck with.
Love that, dude. Love that, man. Because that really works. That really works for me, right? Like the idea that what you just said, which I think is going to be one of the quote cards that we make out of this episode, that like people don't want to be sold. They don't want to be pushed. They just want to be spoken with, or however it was. I'm sure Roanne will get the right version out of it. So then let's go to that. How does one go from genuine conversation to sales conversation? How do you make that transition?
Yeah. So I think what's really big, or a big thing about people in general, is that they don't like to turn business away, right? They don't like to be able to kind of sit back and say, this isn't a good buyer for me. This isn't a good person to have in a conversation with. And most of the time, you're never going to get to that point without having a conversation with them, right? So we, with our customers, even our kind of thing is like, listen, let's get to the conversation, right? So when you reach out to somebody, ask them for the conversation. You're not telling them you can do business with them. You're not telling them that your solution is a good solution. You're telling them your solution works for other people and you think it'll work for them. But who knows, right? Let's talk about it, right? So it's not so much transitioning as it is just, again, having a conversation and asking people in-depth questions, asking them about their business, asking them about their life, asking them about what they've been through, what their experiences are, what are their current pain points, right? For me, my number one question that I ask almost everybody is when I get on the phone is why did you take this call? Right? Like what was the reason that you took this call? Right? There's a reason that you took the call. It wasn't just because you wanted to talk to Brent. I know I'm a pretty nice guy, but right, like so there's some kind of pain point that drove you there, right? And so if you just start by asking questions and kind of kneading in and talking to people about their life and their experiences and their businesses and why are we here today, and talking about that, all that stuff just comes out naturally, and it always will. So I don't know if it's necessarily making the transition as much as just understanding that, like, if the more I have a conversation with you, the more that I'm going to end up actually selling to you without even knowing it, because I'm gonna be like, okay, I read the pain, I understand the pain. Here's what my experience back tells me that I can tell you what your solution is. And most of the time, it's of course going to be what solution I'm selling or talking about, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. Stacy Dobis is saying it. That's a good question to ask, why they took the call. That reminds me, like one of my, I've been making speaking points about networking for a long time, right? That was kind of like my first kind of thing that I really got passionate about, started evangelizing. And one of the most simple speaking points that I have is this idea that when you're in a networking situation, everybody starts a conversation with like, what do you do? Or where are you from? And I like to tell people to say, what brought you here? Because it allows you to just kind of understand where to add value. And I feel like, why did you take this call is the Zoom version of that, right? Like the way that you get into like understanding what their priorities are and what their needs are, what pain points are there that you might be able to help with. From there, is it always kind of, do you ask that in a completely open form and let the conversation take you where it may? Or do you have a way to slot it back towards the things that actually drive the needle for you professionally?
Well, I think both. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're not listening, then what's the point in having a conversation with them, right? So as I have the conversation, I'm always going to listen. I'm going to jot down, and I'm kind of a bullets guy, right? So like I don't put full sentences down, but I jot keywords down that will always make my brain kind of go back to that, right? And so as we're going through the conversation, it always organically comes back to one of those points. And I'm like, as you mentioned earlier, you said this, right? And so I can kind of pull it back to that. but you don't always have to, you don't always have to bring it in. But when I say that's the first thing I ask, like I tell people straight up, like, hey, first we're going to do introductions, and the next thing I'm going to ask you is why you're here today. Like, why are we having this call, right? Is there an initiative you're looking at? Is it something cool that you want to do, right? That prefaces the whole conversation. So now I know where to run with it, right? If they're serious, I'm going to know almost right away. If they're not serious, then I'm like, cool, I'm just having a conversation with them. At the end result is we come out of this, two cool people having a great conversation, and I get a lot of stuff. But from that conversation, I'm going to know where to take it now. Do I send it to marketing? Do I reach out later? What do I do with this person to keep them in the loop? But now I have that information, right? But my end result coming off of that call or that conversation, that meeting does not have to be a yes, or even I'm going to buy from you or whatever, right? But it does dictate the direction in which I want to take the call take the relationship when I'm done with it.
I like that outlook, man. I like the idea of going into it completely open to whatever it may result in a conversation, and just focusing on adding value, just knowing that on the back end, you have different paths to put them through, right? Like you have different kind of choose your adventure based on whatever this connection may be. And I can see how that would be why you create a tool like Maverick, right? Like if I'm just like rationalizing all this stuff, like I understand that Maverick is a really, really good way of creating kind of like these journeys on the back end. And it does a bunch of other stuff, right? But like the thing that I really like about it is the idea that it creates all these like customized journeys on the back end that allow you to continue to foster relationships. If that is the approach, and if it is show up and add value no matter what, do you have a governor kind of like switch that allows you to not take too many calls that are not going to lead anywhere, right? Like when you are doing this approach, you're selling, are you controlling for that on the front end because it's people that you are reaching out to, or are you taking inbound calls and also applying this system? Can you tell me a little bit about how to control how much time you spent on the first call in order to make it productive?
Yeah, so I think one's a proactive and one's a reactive approach, right? So if it's a proactive approach, then I'm reaching out to people, right? And so I'm actively asking for a conversation. If they're going to have that conversation, then of course I want to have it with them, and I'm going to have it with them. And I don't necessarily know that it always has to be that you're adding value throughout, but it always has to be like, I'm okay with this conversation not being a sale. Like I'm okay with the end result not being it, because I can do something with that information. Again, like, such a small percentage of potential buying market is buying right now, right? So the other is a reactive approach, right? So if somebody is reaching out to me, through networking, and they want to do a 30-minute call or whatever, I'm always going to take it because I believe in a good network, right? And so, but those are the times where you kind of have to say, is it worth my time or is it not worth my time? I believe in always being able to find time to do 30-minute conversations with networks and to build your network, but you oftentimes don't have that time, right? So, and then that goes the same way when people do introductions. I get introduced to a lot of people that say, hey, I think that this would be great for this person. You should chat with them and see what happens and whatnot, right? And a lot of times you get off those phone calls and you're just like, that was a complete waste of my time, right? But a lot of times you get a phone call and you're like, that was awesome. I just met like a really cool person. I think this can transition to something else, and I might not get business from them, but they now have business somewhere else, right? So, and that's the whole networking adage. But it's the same concept. It's the same concept when you're doing sales and you're outreach. So my mind shifts depending on what it is. If it's a proactive approach for me, then I'm always going to take the call. That said, I'm not always going to take a yes if somebody finds what I'm doing really interesting. A lot of times I'm not afraid to turn the business away. I'm never afraid to. So that's where I get really deliberate with some of those things. When I'm in a conversation, I'm like, hey, this is not a good fit for what we're doing. I'll still have the phone call. I'll just kind of cut it down a little bit shorter, just to be cautious of my time.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. And it makes me think of how you evangelize this idea of being a hunter. That's kind of sounds like that idea of proactive approach versus reactive approach. I want to give a shout out to Don, who's in the chat's been great right now. Like great conversations happening in the chat. I love it. I see you, Don. I hadn't said your name earlier. MVP of the community, so I got to call her out. She's always adding value. So, so proactive versus reactive approach. Can you tell me a little bit about your kind of like your hunter approaches, right? Because you're a great prospector and you have systematized a lot of this stuff. Can you tell me a little bit how you make it proactive?
Yeah, well, still just doing it, and number one, I think a lot of it is just people don't want to do it, right? But it's also really, really difficult. I mean, to be proactive and be good at hunting and business development, there's multiple components that have to happen, and there's no excuse, right? There's no not being able to do and be successful, right? I need to be able to outbound consistently and constantly, right? Well, in order for me to do that, I have to have a list of consistent and constant people that I can have outbound to, right? Well, and then I also have to have consistent and constant conversations with people to dwindle down and get my 3% and then figure out what to do with my 97%, right? But then I also have to have diligent follow-up and meaningful follow-up, because only 3% of your potential buying market is actively buying right now. And that doesn't mean you're going to get the 3%. Right. So think about that, that only 3% of your potential entire marketing, or target market is buying right now. And that doesn't mean you're going to get those 30%. So the vast majority need more interaction in the future. Vast majority need more connections in the future. And you need to follow up and make sure and try to get that information, or them move back into the conversation. So from a proactive approach, there's constant activity, and it has to happen. This is one of the things that we talk about with Maverick, is it's consistency. It's a really, really difficult thing to have consistency. But if you have consistency in your outbound and who you're reaching out to in your email and your activity, you're going to be successful. Law of averages is always going to outweigh anything else that you have going on, right? But then you have to be diligent with the other stuff, with the follow-up, which is really difficult to do if you're doing these other things, right? So that's where the common problem becomes, is I can't do all of these things at once, but yet all of them at once is required for me to be super successful. Right. And so you always look at the most successful people. They're always really good at one of those things. Usually it's the follow-up. Usually it's the proactive outbound. But that's kind of the proactiveness that I'm talking about, is being proactive and diligent. Of, if somebody says this isn't for me, reach out to me Q2, we might have something then. You have to be proactive in reaching out and hitting those people. Those are your buyers, right? Not the people that are buying now are your buyers, but it's such a small percentage. Those are your buyers. So you have to be proactive, and you have to be diligent. You have to do those things consistently and constantly. And so I've just learned over the years that it's something that is absolutely required. And almost every time, if I think back, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to make that phone call or send that email. Almost every single time I did make the phone call or send the email, that person was buying. I was like, shit, if I didn't reach out to that person in this particular instance, I never would have gotten that opportunity, right? So from a practice standpoint, it's really just going out and asking for the business. I mean, I don't think enough people do that. How about I just go and I sit down with you and I say, hey, can I have your business? And if the answer is no, the answer is no, right? But be proactive about it. What's the worst case scenario?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I want to dive into the follow-up stuff with you. But I had the same question that Lee Bishop had, that he put in the chat. Where does the 3% number come from of buyers actively in the market?
Just research that we've done. So research that we've done has proven. So it ranges, and we're I think it's 3 to 5 or something like that, but it ranges, right? And so the other numbers, of course, just math. So, but yeah, so from the research that we've done, and just so we know, it's a really interesting number, actually, and I talk about it a lot.
That is an interesting number, man. So I asked you to see where you got it from, because to me, that's the same exact message from the Ultimate Sales Machine, right? They talk about that same number. It's interesting that you came to the same conclusion with your own research, that it's this idea that if you have a stadium full of people that are your market, only 3% are in a buying motion, and maybe 6% are gonna be in a buying motion in the next 90 to 120 days. So you got to find a way to capture everybody when you get to talk to your marketplace. And the way that they preach it is to have this kind of core story that can cast a wide net, and then bring it into relevancy of your solution. So you're moving everybody down the buyer journey. But I know that you're more of a relevant follow-up kind of guy, so that you're talking to your whole market. 3% are in buying motion, and the rest of it is about relevant follow-up when it comes to, or at least from what I remember from our conversation. So I'd love to have you expand on that, man. The idea of the right way to follow up and how you think about that.
Yeah, sure. So the real numbers are 3%, and then roughly 40% are ready to buy but not buying, right? And then 55 to 56% are not actively buying at all, right? So I think those are the numbers, right? So which means that there's a decent portion of that 40% that's kind of ready to buy, but they're not, right? And that's okay, right? And then there's the other portion that's just not at all buying right now, but they're in the potential buying market at some point. So really you kind of focus on the larger amounts, right? The smaller amount is buying. They're buying. Cool. I hit them. They have a pain point. We're going to talk to them. We're going to get them over the finish line to buy my product because I believe in what I'm selling. So the other part of it is that you have to focus on the other part. So 9 out of 10 times when you get a response from somebody or whatever the math is, right? When you get a response from somebody, they're going to tell you, no, I'm not interested right now. Thanks. Maybe try me later. Or, hey, we're going through an acquisition. Or, hey, I'm having a baby. I'm going on maternity leave, paternity leave, whatever it might be. There's always something in the future, right? And so people always equate time to value, right? How much time is how much value is my time worth, right? So how much am I going to spend on each thing? And then how much money is that going to give me, or how much value is that to me or my organization? So what happens most of the time is people, when they get that follow-up request, or, hey, like we're going through an acquisition, 9 out of 10 times, it just ends up going into a task and it ends up getting missed because your brain can't get to it 3 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later to say there's value here, there's money here, there's this person did not tell me no, they just told me they're not buying right now, so I need to do it later, right? That said, when people do follow up and they're good at it, because you have to do it consistently and constantly, and there's so many of those tasks you have to do, most people resort to the, hey, I'm just following up with you, see how things are going. Hey, I wanted to check in with you. How's that going, right? Those fall on deaf ears because they're getting it from everybody, right? And so, but in the scenario that I talked about with somebody has an acquisition, hey, Brent, we're going through an acquisition, hit me up Q2, not something we're going to do now, no promises then, but it might be worth conversation, right? There's money there, right? So I'm going to be far more likely to get a response in return and for that person to remember me if I actually reach out to that person in Q2 and tell them, hey, I know last time we talked, you said you're going through an acquisition. How did that go? Congratulations. I'd love to learn more about it when we talk, right? And then now that there's relevancy in that. And I think people get lost in what they mean by relevancy, right? I don't need to know their family and I don't need to know all the stuff about them, even though that's great, right? What I need to do, though, is let them know that I heard them the first time we had a conversation or the first interaction, and that I'm a real human, and that I'm putting that back on them the next time I hit them. And so that's what I often mean about relevancy.
So relevancy isn't so much like, hey, Steelers just won this weekend, just checking in if you want to do business with me. It's, hey, last time we talked, this was kind of the state of your business. I remember it being here and you thought that it would be here in like 60 days. Now that it's here, is it right? Is this the right time to talk? It's kind of like contextualizing it to the transactional nature of the relationship. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. Let's just, be memorable, right? And just acknowledge that you heard them and you understood them, right? Just a follow-up is just a follow-up. Okay, you're just doing this because it's part of your daily task thing, right? If they told you something about the football game and you recognize they're going to, of course you're going to want to say that, right? But yeah, no, it's just acknowledging that you understood what they were saying. They weren't just another number. Okay, I understand you're not buying from me now, but I am interested in your business. So the next time I reach out to you, I'm going to make sure that you understand I'm interested in your business holistically, right? You're not just another follow-up on my task list. And that's what most people get. Oh, I'm just checking in with you. How are things going? Is this a better time? Quite honestly, it can be the same for even if somebody tells you no. I had somebody who actually emailed me back and said no. It was just like, hey, yeah, we're actually building out an internal sales system right now, so this isn't a need for us. I had them up in 6 months and I was like, hey, like last time we talked, you said you were building an internal sales system. How did that go? Like, was it successful? Or are you still doing it? I was able to hit on tons of little things. And they responded to me, it was like, yeah, like that's great. Things are going great. They're awesome, but thank you very much, right? And so those things, I think, in the relevancy part of the conversation, like those are the things you have to hit on that make people remember you the same as you remember them.
Love that. Love that. Stacy Dobis is putting in the chat. I like that. Be memorable. I will remember your goals and Ted Lasso poster. That's cool. I didn't even realize that was a Ted Lasso thing, but I like it.
It is. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. So Stacy's also asking in the Q&A, where are you finding most of your clients? Are you using social media, referrals, word of mouth? I think this is kind of a good moment to talk about this conversation that you and I went down of just whether you think that, whether leading through marketing or leading through sales is the move, and kind of how they fit together. How are you? Let's start with what she asked. How are you finding most of your clients? Like, how are you getting in the door in order to start this motion that you're so good at?
Yeah, great question. So really asking. And so, I'm not going to talk about Maverick on this, if people want to learn more, great, but Maverick App is our primary source. It finds, curates lists, and pumps out consistent, constant activity that hits inboxes every single day of new potential prospects. And then they respond, yeah, I'd be interested in a call. Yeah, I'd be interested in a call, or no, I'm not interested in a call. But it's outbound activity. Outbound activity and BD efforts are the most important thing in my mind that you could possibly do. We've done very little traditional marketing to date as a company, and we need to, because they need to happen, and we're slowly kind of getting there. But to build our brand, to build where we were, and to build up to this point, now we've primarily done it by literally reaching out to people and just asking them if we can have a conversation with them, asking them if we can talk about our business with them. You of course have to have, relevant content. So luckily I think we're pretty good at that, but put relevant content in front of people and ask them if they're willing to have a conversation. I think you'd be really surprised at how many people will say yes.
I really welcome this conversation, right? Because I've talked so little about outbound stuff on the show because it's not my natural motion. But what attracted me to the way that you do this is the way that Maverick is built, right? Like it's this idea that, and Lee was asking, is Maverick your CRM? Yes, Lee, he has a company. He developed this app, but he developed this software, right? It's called Maverick. That's one part CRM, one part kind of like email automator, also another part, what's the company's I'm thinking for, like 6 Sense or these other Zoom Info, right? Like it has a bunch of data of if you want to look into a market vertical and sort it by contact information of this kind of company of this size and these kinds of titles, kind of like Sales Navigator does on LinkedIn, it then populates those names into whatever your outbound motion is going to be. And then you can automate all these different journeys on the back end of, this is the first time this person's interacting with me. So they're going to get like this email today, this other email in 4 days, and blah, 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 to, I haven't talked to them in 6 months. This is what I want to put them through. I find that really, really interesting in the way that you can organize all that stuff. So then to answer Stacy's question, you are finding most of your clients via email outreach because you have an app that you're allowed to, that allows you to essentially create a Dream 100 every week or every 2 months or whatever, if you really want to kind of like build a big list of people to outreach?
Well, yeah. So I mean, in a short way, yes, but it's not the only thing, right? I mean, it's our starting point. It's kind of where we start when we pull in, but you have to have other components of your outreach. Like eventually, your business turns into referrals and turns into people talking about you because you built a brand awareness, right? So you start to get people that have referred business into you, and that ends up happening, as well as like you then have some kind of marketing thing on the other end that you do with people. You have to be on social, you have to be marketing in some capacity, but everything starts with Maverick. And so I talked about this a little bit earlier, but to kind of go back to it is, every sales rep has ebb and flows, right? It doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter who you are. Every rep is going to have their ebb and their flow, and their ebb and their flow, right? Their peaks and their valleys. And the reason is because there's so many things that have to be done consistently and constantly that we just can't do, right? And so one of the things you talk about with Zoom Info or some of these other platforms is like, one of the things I need a constant list of people to reach out to. It's just inevitable. It's impossible for me to constantly reach out to people if I don't have a constant list for it, right? Well, in order for me to also be effective, I need to do constant outreach to those people. Those don't really marry, right? Because in order for me to do constant outreach, I now have to have a constant list, but I can't have a constant list if I'm constantly doing outreach, right? It's an impossibility. I can't do those things. So really the problem out there right now is that you have an email platform that might send emails in an automated way, except for I'm missing the other component of how do I feed this machine? How do I have a consistent and constant list of people that I'm reaching out to? And so that's what Maverick does, is it consistently, constantly every day goes out and finds a new batch of people, that map to your target buyer, drops them into your sequences, and starts scheduling them for send and sending. So it's literally just having this automated machine that's consistently and constantly happening behind you. And as much as it is the data that's coming in is great, and you have all this stuff happening, the one thing that you have that's happening is consistency. There's no breaks, there's no holidays, there's no sick time, right? And if you think about that from a law of averages standpoint, if I'm just consistently and constantly reaching out to people and going deep and wide and asking questions I'm bound to be successful, because now I'm just fielding information and I'm taking phone calls, and I'm able to decipher between the yeses and the nos, and I'm able to figure out, really hone in on my target buyers in a really, really solid way. But now, if they're 97%, I now have data that has just been informed to me that I can now inform marketing. And I can now say, hey, marketing, I did my part, I did my thing. Can you now reach out to these people? They've seen our brand, they know us in some capacity, and try to loop them back in that way, right? And so that's really kind of the machine, right? Let's pull them in, let's ask them for their business, and then let's put them somewhere else after the fact. But it creates consistency.
Yeah, I love that, man. And I number one, I thank you for bringing all this stuff and making me bring up Maverick, right? Because it shows that you're a value added guy. If I was to break this out into a framework, right? And it's going to end up being essentially everything Maverick does. But like, if you want to go without Maverick, what I'm hearing is you need to be constantly sourcing lists of people that would fit into your ideal client persona or within one degree of variation for that. Then you need to be sending those folks messages that allow them to, that allow you to enter their stratosphere, enter their airspace. If we want to continue the pilot analogies, which by the way are going nuts in the chat with
Awesome.
pilot analogies. Yeah, I love it. Then you want to also have, so if I was to set this all up by myself, I would be like I would have something that's be looking for lists. I would create a cadence of outreach messages that are somewhat tweakable depending on me tweaking something on a list. It would then kind of tweak the outreach messaging as well. Put that on some kind of automation where at a specific cadence, once a week or once a month or once a quarter, you come up with a list. You kind of like engineer it to, you engineer the outreach cadence to make it somewhat specific to that list, and then send it out. And then from the response of that, you have another back end process to slot people in different varying levels of interest that you can stay in front of them and know when to reach out again specifically, and or put them into automated cadences. And then also another pathway to send to marketing efforts of just like, all right, this person's, like not in sales mode. What kind of stuff can we send them that is educational, inspirational, entertaining, that will keep them engaged until they are somewhere in the market? Did I kind of like chop that up into like the 6 sequences that you think about it that way?
Yeah. I think, the first part is really kind of at the onset, and we always talk about this, and so we do, we tell our customers the same thing, right? I mean, you're going for the conversation, right? I think too many people out the gate go for the sale, right? I'm going to try to sell you in my first email, which gives me 0 content to talk about in email 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 6, right? And it's average like 9 to 12 touches before I get any response, let alone a yes, right? So if I blow up all my info in one email, then I'm kind of screwing myself, right? I have no relevant piece to put behind it. So we always talk about like, go for the conversation. This is what we do. Here's a problem that we solve. Is this essentially a pain point of yours right now, right? And so go into that and really try to get into the conversation and understand that you're going for the conversation, which means that that's all it is, right? Then you can do the rest on the back end. So that's the first part. I think some of those emails probably have to be fairly generic, only because you're saying, hey, I know my target buyer, but I don't know necessarily if you're buying right now. So I kind of need to go deep and wide and kind of try to identify that stuff, right? And so you do go and you have some fairly generic stuff, but then you have that whole other component, which is the not nows but later. I'm not buying right now, but I might buy later, or I'm going to give you a buying signal that I can't buy right now, or that I'm going to buy later, right? Or the people that you have to nurture. If you go and ask people to look at their CRM, hey, give me a list of people that you haven't communicated with in the last 24 months, within your company, or the last 12 months. It'd be hundreds, if not thousands. Like, that can't be the case, right? Those people need to be hit in some capacity, right? But the system's broken, the process is broken for all of that. So because of that, that's really kind of where Maverick focuses on. Like, okay, like I have this batch of people coming in, I'm going to catch my 3%, but the vast majority need more interaction. How do I control that interaction? How do I make sure that I'm going to interact with them? And then beyond that, now how do I inform marketing? Marketing, here's people that you now are warm leads to marketing, if you will, right? To say, hey, marketing, these are people that have seen our brand, they know who we are. Put more stuff in front of them, send them back to me when they're ready to buy. And so now we've come full circle and had a really nice process full circle, where the people that know your buyer the best is informing marketing, and then marketing is pushing them back to you.
Got it. That's clean, man. That's clean. I like that process. I'm going to go back and re-listen to that clip at least once again. I think we're clipping that one out, right, Ryan? Please. That being said, I'm hearing a lot in the chat. Yeah, but cold emails are hard. Cold emails have never worked for me. Will this work for a 10K plus product? Let's start there, which is an easier question to answer. This stuff, like through Maverick App or through your own past experience, have you ever sold like $10,000 contracts using this kind of stuff, or is this more of like a B2C motion?
Yeah, so I used to sell using essentially this method, but I used to sell, my average deal size was $6 million.
Okay.
Right. So like, so I can tell you one of the reasons that it's perceived that it doesn't work is because people believe in this magical thing that doesn't exist. If you expect that something's going to feed a machine and email somebody in the first 3 touches, you're going to get a response and it's going to be a yes. If that's your expectation, then you have the wrong expectations. Right. This is a very much a marathon, not a sprint. Very much. The smallest percentage of people are going to get back to you. But the beauty of it, and what kind of Maverick taught you, is if you have a consistent thing happening, then it means it's always happening. Where if you have a break point in that, it's not always happening. Well, now your numbers are even worse, right? But if you have something that's constantly working for you in the background and doing it for you, well, I can focus on a lot of other parts of my business, still catch those small percentages that come in. But most of the time, people just don't give it enough time. The expectation is this is going to be a miracle thing, and all of a sudden people are going to start buying from me. It's brand awareness. It's getting in their inbox, building that subconscious relationship with them. Just because you don't get a response with somebody doesn't mean that they didn't click on your website and do a little bit of research and say like, hey, who is this guy that's emailing or girl that's emailing me, right? Like those things are happening in the background. There's millions of times where you'll send an email and they'll forward it to the right person because they're not the right person. And those people will get your information and go on your website and oftentimes respond back to you. So there's so much more that happens to that consistent and constant interaction with people that people have to realize that it cannot just be correlated to I send emails and I don't get yeses back. Well, that should be expected, right? But if you understand now that I have this machine that's constantly feeding and constantly now getting my brand out there and people clicking on it, and now I can take this and give it to marketing, eventually those things are going to turn. Eventually you're going to have those things flip for you, but it's going to take time. But cold emailing is really, really hard. That's one of the reasons we have a platform where we write emails for people, right? Because it is really, really hard, but I also think that people overthink it and they overcomplicate it, and then they give up too early. And I think that's the biggest thing that I see.
So what I'm hearing from you essentially is like setting up this framework is not the silver bullet of the business, but it is necessary tip of the spear stuff in order to develop consistency down the other paths of the business, right? Like if you don't have this stuff happening on the top, feeding the machine, then you're going to have zero output moments, as opposed to, kind of like if a factory doesn't have the raw materials going in, at some point it's going to shut down, right? The raw materials of business is leads and conversations that turn into sales could be a very low percentage, but you need to hit those kind of metrics and be able to track him across a thing. I really like that, man. And that's one of the big reasons why I'm like strongly considering moving into Maverick, because I recognize this idea that like, no matter how much of just like I think I'm a really good evangelist, but it's never going to replace adding, 500 kind of like outreaches to the top of the funnel for me that can then lead to what it sounds like a conversation, which then can get the ball rolling. And I can also systemize what happens after that conversation. Yeah. And when I'm hearing about this, kind of like the 2 things that I would love to get some advice on from you is what does make a good cold email? And then what makes a good kind of like, what is your actual advice around designing once you get into the conversation, the sales process? But let's start one at a time, right? You said people overcomplicate the cold email. You see a lot of that stuff happening. What should go in one of these like top of funnel cold email sequences?
Yeah. So like first, so one of the things to kind of go back quickly to what we do. So Aaron Ross, I don't know if anyone knows who Aaron Ross is, but he was like number 2 guy at Salesforce in terms of sales, like became a millionaire just doing selling, right? And this was his process, right? And this isn't something that I learned necessarily from him, but I knew him, I've known him for a few years. Great guy. We think very much the same, but like it's the same type of process, right? And so, but him and I have this conversation a lot about emails. And when I say people overcomplicate it, I go back to people try to sell in that first email. Like, stop trying to sell somebody and try to get a conversation, right? Stop trying to make them buy what you have in a single email, and just make them want to get on the phone with you and learn more. You're not going to sell somebody in an email. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you might, but you're like, it's so unlikely. So then, like, shift gears of like, here's our value. Here's the pain point that we know most people like you have. I'm going to assume that you have this pain point. Like, let's have a conversation about what we do. So I think one of the big things is people just go into to try to sell too much. It should be short, concise, to the point. Here's the person I'm looking to speak with. Here's what we do. Here's the problem that we solve. Here's the problem that we solve. Here's how we solve that problem. Are you the right person for that conversation? And if they're the right person, yeah, I'm the right person. And if they have a pain point, yeah, I'm the right person and I have a pain point, right? I mean, they might not say it that way, right? If they're the right person, then and they're not buying, then they say no thanks, right? But you have the right person. There's so much that you can gain, not to flip it back, but there's so much that you can gain from outbound that is more than just a yes. You can find out a lot about your buyer, right? Like, where you thought your perceived title buyer within a company. I want to talk to all people that have operations. Well, if every single operations person responds to you is like, nope, not me, not me, not me, you've now informed yourself about your buyer for future content. Oh, okay, shit. Maybe operations people are not the people I need to be speaking with, right? But you don't know that until you reach out to enough of them to tell you that they're not the right person. Right. So number one, content is short and sweet and concise at the beginning, but then it's really layering in value throughout then from that standpoint, right? Like, again, 9 to 12 touches for anyone to respond, even if it's a no, on average, 9 to 12 touches, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to pepper into my emails so that every single time I touch them, there's some new value aspect there. There's something new that I'm adding to the value equation.
Right. Can you give an example of that, Brent? So like, if the first one is like, hey, this is the pain point that I solve. You're the type of person that normally has this. Do you have this pain point? Right. That's an easy first email. How does one, like, if they didn't respond, like, how do you add value to that conversation and still keep it simple in the follow in the follow?
Put another pain point in there and another solution, right? Like, hey, hey, just got off the phone with a customer, thought about you. They just went through this is how we solved it for them. Like, thought I'd reach out to you again and see if you're interested in a conversation. Right? Throw another pain point in there, throw another solution in there, throw something else that is different than the first time. Because if it's the exact same thing the second time, they're like, yeah, dude, you already told me. Like, I already know. There's no value in that. And then also you're peppering stuff in to potentially turn them into a 3%er, right? So if like, I have value here, nope, I'm not buying. And then like email 4 is like, 2, 3, 4 is like, nope, I'm not buying. But email 5 is like something new. And you're like, oh, maybe I am buying, right? Like, because I didn't know you were doing that. But throughout the entire time, I've built a subconscious relationship with that person. So by the time that value hits their inbox that 6th time, they know who Brent Hale is, whether they think they do or they don't. They know who Brent Hale is, right?
Yeah. As you're doing all this stuff, I'm just thinking about it for my business, right? Like, I'm thinking, maybe my pain point is this idea of people that want to make content, but they've never really made it fit for themselves, right? So it's like maybe an email of just like, content seems to work for everyone, but not for you, as the main pain point, and then qualifying that as like, are you somebody that's gone through that? Have you hired marketing agencies? Blah blah, hasn't worked out. I've got some other ideas of how you do it. If this is something you're solving for, blah, right? And then my next email could be something along the lines of like, an example of how our approach made a podcast much more profitable. And then the next one, it's like, people think that they want to sell through webinars, but nobody wants to go to a webinar. So we approach it this way. Or like, you want to do it through trade shows. So like, this is how you do it in a trade show, right? Like, was kind of how it is, just different contextualizations of how you solved the same problem, but through different pain points. That also includes a nugget of an idea of how you do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so the way that we talk about it and teach it is, your first, and this is what we do internally though, is your first 5 emails are essentially me literally just asking for the conversation, right? Pain point, solution, blah, blah, right? Short, sweet, maybe 2 sentences, 2 paragraphs, whatever, right? Then as you get down the funnel, now as you get into touch 6, 7, 8, 9, now you start to pepper in a little bit more nurturing stuff. Now you start to talk a little bit more about larger solutions that you're doing or larger problems that you've solved, right? Things that might hit home a little bit more because you know definitively they're not the 3% right now. Otherwise, they would have responded to you, right? So now it's like, okay, so now I'm going to start building that subconscious relationship with them, with myself, as well as with my brand for them. So now I'm going to start talking about what my brand has done. Now I'm going to start peppering that stuff in to lay the groundwork for my next move, which is going to be marketing. Right. But that initial kind of nurturing is coming from a human. Hey, I just want to tell you about like customer we just helped, or hey, here's a case study, thought this might find interesting to you. Right. One-to-one, me to you, that's going to come a lot better than from marketing. But that doesn't necessarily I'm going to get a response, but I've laid a really good foundation now. So when I do pass that person to marketing starts putting material in front of them, they're able to visualize and conceptualize a little bit more because I've already put it in front of them.
Cool. What I would like to ask you, Brent, is let's say we get the email working, they are responding, right? You've nailed at least one pain point. In your strategy, it's to get them to a phone call. The way that I understand the phone call is you're listening for problems and objections that you can help with. Do you also have like a designed kind of like sales script piece ready to go? Like, do you have like a presentation ready to go for that? Or how do you think about that, the sales part of the conversations that you engage in? How do you create a good one of those?
So we do, because we have a demo, right? So it's a little bit easier for us because it can transition into a demo, right? And so once we start having a conversation with somebody, we can make a transition into a demo. That said, there's oftentimes I'll first get on the phone with people and I'll talk about a simple fact that we're not going to do a demo today. Today is just about us learning from one another, listening to each other. If this becomes a good fit and it feels like something that's makes sense, let's move it to a demo, right? So we would do that. From a presentation standpoint, to make it a salesy thing or a visual thing, I think that's all depends on the organization. There's many organizations that I've been with that I absolutely despised it because it didn't make any sense to me. I just didn't understand why we were showing something visual when we didn't need to. And then there's other organizations that I felt like we couldn't have an effective, good sales call without some kind of deck, without a presentation. So I think you need to kind of, figure out like what people are interested in within their conversation of you. Like consulting and stuff is really hard because like there's not a lot of visual stuff that you can show in consulting, right? And you can talk about numbers and percentages and stuff like that you've helped people, but that's going to be primarily like an organic type of just face-to-face conversation. So I think it all depends. I've done both. We don't necessarily have anything scripted. I don't believe in scripts in terms of sales calls at all. I think that dehumanizes absolutely everybody involved in the conversation. So I don't believe in that. That said, like I do think that decks often can be very helpful visualization for people, especially when you have a lot to go over.
Okay, I like that. What do you think is the role of what do you think is the role of content in all of this stuff, man? Like, is there a world where maybe one path is, I'll reframe this. When I get cold outreach a lot, and people are like, you got 15 minutes, you got this pain point, bro, you got 15 minutes to talk about it. I'm like, dude, if you can't put it in a freaking video and send it to me and it's explained in 5 minutes, then I don't want to have a 15-minute conversation with you. Right. So like, my approach has always been like, how can I create the 2-minute video sizzle reel that can explain the thing to you to then tell you if you want to get on a phone call. But I would also have to admit that I'm not the best follow-upper. So I might send somebody something that they watch the video and they think it's a great idea, but then I'm not like present to be like, all right, man, is it time to do this thing? Right. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, man? Like, is there a role for like having content that can answer someone's question without having to get on the phone? Or is that only going to reduce the conversion that I can get from sales?
So do you mean if you get the response or if they respond back? Or are you talking if like you get an email, or are you talking if you're going to reach out to somebody in that scenario?
I'm talking about I'm reaching. Yeah. Well, I said it as me getting an email in the sense that like when someone like emails me, is like, you got 50 minutes to chat about something. I'm like, no, bro, I don't have 50 minutes to chat with you. Like send me a video I can look at or something like that. But I wonder if, and so I act that way as well. Right. Like I'm generally not trying to get someone on a open 50-minute call. I'm trying to like figure out what is the piece of content that they need to see that convinces them that they want to talk further. But I wonder if that is more friction to them than actually getting on a call and closing with me, or I'm doing that wrong kind of thing.
Yeah, no. So I don't think so. So I mean, that's a pretty common thing, right? Is like, no thanks, or if you want to send me some information, feel free, right? So that's a big thing, because that just like that's the easiest way to respond to somebody and not have to actually say no, right? So I believe in automating everything. I literally automate my life if I could, like every aspect of it. So I fully believe in automating those responses, and fully believe. So from a receiver standpoint, if you're getting those emails, do whatever you would like. I personally, like, if I decide that I want to reach out to people, I do have some templates written that, like, if I want to respond to somebody because I want to be polite, I have stuff written. But we actually have templates and stuff, and that's part of Engage, which is it within Maverick, is your follow-up sequences, where there's pre-built templates for exactly that instance, right? Like, hey, Brent, this sounds good, but not interested, or, feel free to send me information if you'd like. It might be something we do in the future. Like, there's automation that we have set up for that, where we just drop people into that mission, and they get that email. It's linked to our deck, or to a visual. It's linked to a one page or whatever it might be, and that's a really quick, simple way. The unfortunate part about that is that you never know if somebody's just brushing you off, or if they actually want to get information from you. So you can't just assume that they're brushing you off, because that would be silly. So you need to put information from, but that is time consuming. So I would highly suggest creating templates for almost every scenario like that you can possibly think of.
Got it. So it's kind of a mix, right? Because some people are going to tell you that genuinely, like, yeah, man, if you can convince me on a video, I'm in. Other people are going to tell you that as in, like, rather not say no. And then some people are going to want to get on the phone. So it's kind of just being prepared with the whole thing. And I would imagine that for the person, at least for me, this works, right? Like, for the person that genuinely is just like, I just don't have time to put another 15-minute call on my calendar that I don't know is going to be really valuable to me. So send me a video that convinces me. If they do send me a video, I'm much more likely to actually, like, right? Like,
Sure.
if you reached out to me via Maverick, it was like, hey man, I know that you're a real great opener, but not a good closer. And I've got the good back end for that. You got 50 minutes. I'm going to be like, no, I don't have 50 minutes, but send me a
Sure.
video on it. And you send me a video of, like, everything that you've explained to me so far, maybe clipped from this episode. I would be like, yeah, I'm interested. Like,
Yeah, well, that's it, right? And so, and you're of course going to take time, but more importantly is that it now gives you a reason to interact with them again, right? So now I can interact. I can send a note to you, 5-8 days later, and say, hey, like, sent you a video per your request. Like, did you get a chance to look at it? Like, love to know your thoughts on it, And then now you're getting a brass tacks, though, because now you're going to force them to respond to you again, right? And so and maybe they respond to, yeah, I'm just not interested this time. Cool. I got to a no. I'm good. Like, that's solid for me. I love getting to no's. I do. I love them. I love no's. Tell me no. No is a yes in my book, because I can immediately remove you and not have to worry about you anymore. Right. So yeah, the quicker that you can get to the yes or the no is the best. So
yeah, that makes sense, man. And Mitko is saying how to cope with a gazillion of scenarios. Sometimes I forget that I templated something and start writing it from zero. Do you have a system for, like, when you find the new scenario of something that you want to create a template for, and how you organize that? Is that done inside Maverick App, or is that just kind of like an
yeah.
intuitive?
Yeah, so so all these kind of pain points is our design for Maverick was looking at the pain points of exactly these things, right? Of, like, what are the true pain points? So you actually have missions, like multiple different types of missions of multiple touches that you preset and pre-do. So for every scenario, so I have one for if somebody responds to me and says, yeah, I'm interested in having a conversation. I have one where I immediately drop them into it. Says, great that you're interested. Here's my calendar. Would love to get on the phone. And then I have a subsequent follow-up after that hits them in 3 days that says, hey, like, are you still interested in a conversation, right? Like, so because it's going to take five touches after the first interaction to get them into a conversation. That's just, again, there's an average to that as well, right? So it's follow-up even to somebody saying yes, right? And then then there's a demo that I do, and so getting off of that demo is like, okay, I know I'm going to have to send primary information of an overview of my company, overview of the demo. I have that, and then subsequent touches to that setup. So the way that Maverick's designed is that you can set up different missions for multiple different scenarios that have 5 touches to them, so that no matter what the scenario is, I'm setting myself up for the future to ensure that I'm always hitting that person and reconnecting with them.
Love it, man. Brent, I really appreciate the conversation, man. Like, this is one of those things where there's clearly a gap for me in the people getting to know me, trusting me, buying in on the fact that they think I'm smart and I may be able to help them. But I have, like, a big gap inside the going from there to like, exactly what is it that I can do for you and how do I enroll? So, this system that you're expressing, that, of creating these different cadences, having constant outreach, and then being able to like keep track of all this stuff is something that I really, really clearly need in my business, and just being able to conceptualize it, whether or not it's through Maverick App or whatever other amalgamation of softwares I want to use for it. It's super, super valuable to me. So I have to assume that it's valuable to my community. And I love the way that you talk about it, man. So I just really appreciate you making time for this. I think that what you created with Maverick is a product that the world needs. And I would love to just kind of give you the platform to talk about on the show, how you find it, what's next steps. If somebody wants to get into your universe, connect with you, or just go to Maverick App, just promote it a little bit before we sign off here.
Yeah, thank you very much, and really appreciate being on. I really love talking about this stuff, even if it's not unrelated to Maverick. Maverick was built literally from pain points. I mean, I've built a lot of sales teams. I've been in sales. I've worked with a lot of big companies, worked with a lot of small companies, and the reality is the pain points are always the same. It doesn't matter, right? And to hunt and do business development, do it effectively, is really difficult to do. And so we've tried to hit on all those pain points and solve all of those within our platform and make it super easy and really simple. But at the same time, there's kind of a mind shift, I think, that has to happen when people think about business development. And so we're trying to foster that mind shift a little bit too, and get people thinking about how they look at it a little bit differently. So I love talking about it. It's really enjoyable. I hope some people found some value in it. If they want to talk about it more, I did throw my calendar in there. They can certainly into the chat, so they can certainly click on that, as well as I think you guys shared a calendar, get on and actually do a demo, but and then maverick.app.io. So follow us on LinkedIn. We throw a bunch of stuff up there, so you'll see a lot of that stuff as well.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this, man. It's
been great.
This was great.